I've been hunting these woods since I was 12 years old. My granddad taught me every trail, every hollow, every creek that runs through Raleigh County. He used to say the land remembers things, keeps secrets in the roots and stones. I never understood what he meant until 3 weeks ago, when I saw the man standing at the tree line near Piney Creek. It was early November, deer season. I'd taken a week off from the hardware store in Beckley to stay at the old hunting cabin my family's owned since the 50s. The cabin sits about 4 miles off Route 16, down a logging road that hasn't seen maintenance since the coal company pulled out in '89. It's quiet out there, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. The first morning, I woke up before dawn like always, made coffee on the propane stove, loaded my .30-06, and headed out to the stand I'd set up near the ridge overlooking the creek. The air was cold enough to see your breath, and fog was settling in the valleys between the hills. Perfect conditions. I was halfway across the clearing behind the cabin when I saw him. He was standing at the edge of the tree line, maybe 200 yards out, right where the old trail to Piney Creek begins. Just standing there, motionless. Even from that distance, I could tell he was tall, wearing dark clothes. At first, I thought maybe it was another hunter, someone who'd gotten turned around in the pre-dawn darkness. But something felt wrong. I raised my hand and called out, "Hey, you all right over there?" No response. He didn't move, didn't wave back, didn't even turn his head. I shouldered my rifle and started walking toward him, figuring maybe the guy was hurt or confused. But as I got closer, maybe within 100 yards, I stopped. The way he was standing, it wasn't natural. His arms hung straight down at his sides, and his head was tilted just slightly forward, like he was staring at the ground in front of him. Or at me. I couldn't tell which. "You need help?" I shouted again. Nothing. The fog shifted around his legs, but he remained perfectly still. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I've seen plenty of strange things in these woods over the years, black bears, the occasional bobcat, even a mountain lion once. But I'd never felt afraid like this, not from a person. I decided to circle around, head to my stand a different way. When I looked back from the edge of the clearing, he was gone, just vanished. The fog had thickened, sure, but not enough to hide someone that quickly. I spent the whole day in the stand, but I couldn't focus. Kept thinking about that figure. When I climbed down at dusk and walked back to the cabin, I made sure to check the spot where he'd been standing. The ground was soft from recent rain. There should have been boot prints, some kind of disturbance in the leaves and mud. There was nothing, not a single track. I told myself it was just the fog playing tricks, my eyes adjusting to the low light. But I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing there, that unnatural stillness. The next morning, I woke up at 5:30, didn't even bother with coffee. I went straight to the window and looked out toward the tree line. He was there again, same spot, same position. My hands started shaking. I grabbed my binoculars from the gear bag and focused on him. Through the lenses, I could see more detail. He was wearing what looked like old work clothes, a dark jacket and pants, the kind coal miners used to wear decades ago. His face was pale, almost gray in the early light, and his eyes, his eyes were open, staring straight ahead, not blinking. I watched him for 10 minutes. He didn't move once, didn't sway in the wind, didn't shift his weight. Nothing. It was like looking at a statue. This time, I wasn't going out there. I locked the cabin door, loaded my rifle, and kept watching from the window. Around 6:45, right as the sun started breaking over the eastern ridge, he disappeared again. One moment he was there, the next he wasn't. No walking away, no fading into the fog, just gone. I drove into Beckley that afternoon, told myself I needed supplies, but really I just needed to be around people. I stopped at Floyd's Diner on Harper Road and sat at the counter nursing a coffee I didn't want. Floyd himself, a big man in his 70s with hands like catcher's mitts, came over to chat. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Connor," he said, wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen better days. I tried to laugh it off. Just didn't sleep great. You know how it is out at the cabin. That old place still standing? Floyd shook his head. Your granddad loved that spot. Always said there was something special about that land, though I never understood what he meant. Something in the way he said it made me look up. Did he ever mention anything strange out there? Floyd's expression changed. He glanced around the diner, even though we were the only ones there besides a trucker in the back booth. Your granddad used to come in here sometimes, late at night after he'd been hunting. One time, must have been 76 or 77, he told me about something he saw. Said there was a man who stood at the edge of his property, just watching. Wouldn't come closer, wouldn't leave, just stood there, morning after morning. My coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. What happened? Your granddad stopped going out there for a while. A few months, maybe. When he finally went back, the man was gone. Floyd leaned in closer. But here's the thing, Connor. My daddy told me a similar story when I was a boy. Said his uncle, who used to work the mines up near Piney Creek in the 30s, saw the same thing. A man standing at the tree line, never moving, never speaking, just watching. That's impossible, I said. That'd make it almost 100 years. Floyd straightened up, went back to wiping the counter. I'm just telling you what I heard. Your granddad, he was a practical man, wasn't one for tall tales. But whatever he saw out there, it shook him. He made your daddy promise never to go to the cabin alone. He paused. You out there by yourself? I nodded. Maybe think about coming back to town for a few days. That land, it's got its own way of doing things. I drove back to the cabin as the sun was setting, told myself I wasn't going to let some local superstition run me off my own property. But I brought every light I had in the cabin out to the main room, set them up facing the windows. If that thing showed up in the dark, I wanted to see it coming. Around 11 that night, I was sitting in the armchair with my rifle across my lap when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching through the leaves outside. They circled the cabin, moving from the back around to the front door. Then they stopped. I could hear breathing, heavy, labored, like someone who'd been running. But there was something wrong with it, something mechanical about the rhythm. In, out, perfectly timed, no variation. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps on the door. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. The knock came again, 3 more times. Then a voice, low and hollow. I've been waiting. My finger tightened on the trigger. Go away, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence. The breathing stopped. The footsteps moved away from the door, back around the cabin. I heard them fade into the distance, heading toward the tree line. I didn't sleep at all that night. Sat in that chair with the rifle, watching the windows until dawn broke. When the sun finally came up, I forced myself to go outside and check the ground around the cabin. There were footprints this time, but they were wrong. Too deep, too evenly spaced, like whatever made them was impossibly heavy or didn't walk like a normal person. They led from the tree line to the cabin and back again, a perfect straight line both ways. I followed them to where they stopped, right at the edge of the clearing where I'd first seen him. And there, carved into the trunk of a massive oak tree, were words, old words, the cuts weathered and gray with age. James Blackwood, died here, 1934. Still waiting. My grandmother's maiden name was Blackwood. Her father disappeared in these woods when she was a girl. They'd found his hunting rifle near Piney Creek, but never found him. My granddad had mentioned it once, said James went out hunting one morning and never came back. The family searched for weeks. I took out my phone and snapped pictures of the carving, of the footprints, of everything. When I looked at the photos later, the carving showed up fine. But in every picture I'd taken of the footprints, they appeared as nothing but dark blurs, like something was interfering with the camera. That afternoon, I started packing. I'd had enough. But as I was loading my truck, I made the mistake of looking toward the tree line one more time. He was closer, not at the edge anymore, but halfway across the clearing. Same position, same clothes, same dead stare. But now I could see his face clearly without binoculars. It was my great-grandfather's face. I'd seen the old photos my grandmother kept, same sharp features, same build, but the expression was wrong. The eyes were hollow, empty. And when I stared at him, I swear to God his mouth moved, formed words I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. You're next. I threw the rest of my gear in the truck and got the hell out of there. Drove back to Beckley doing 80 on those winding roads. Didn't care if I got pulled over. I haven't been back since. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. 3 days ago, I was walking to my car after closing up the hardware store. It was late, past 9, and the parking lot was empty. I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. I turned around. The lot was empty, but in the shadow cast by the streetlight at the far end, I saw something. A figure, tall and still, standing perfectly motionless. I got in my car and drove away. But every morning now, when I look out my apartment window, I check the tree line across the street. So far, I haven't seen him there, but I know he's coming. Whatever my great-grandfather became, whatever waited for him in those woods and claimed him, it's not finished. It's been standing at that tree line for 90 years, watching, waiting for the next Blackwood to come home. Floyd told me something else before I left town. He said his daddy used to say that when someone dies alone in these mountains, lost and afraid, their spirit doesn't just fade away. It stays, watching the last place it saw the living world, waiting for someone from the same blood to take their place, to finish what they started. I don't go near the woods anymore. I don't go anywhere alone after dark. And I sure as hell never look over my shoulder when I hear footsteps anymore, because I'm terrified of what I might see if I turn around. The land remembers, my granddad used to say. Now I understand what he meant. It remembers, and it never forgets. And whatever's standing behind that tree line It's been waiting for me my whole life. I just didn't know it until now. If you enjoy my stories, please subscribe and hit the like button. I'd really appreciate it. Leave a comment telling me which city you're from and what time it is there. I'm curious to know where my favorite subscribers are from, and share the scariest story that ever happened to you. I'll pin the best one under the video forever. My name is James Whitaker, and my wife Sarah and I have been hiking the Great Smoky Mountains for 15 years. We know the trails, we know the weather patterns, we know which overlooks offer the best sunrise views. Or at least, we thought we knew these mountains. What happened on the Alum Cave Trail on October 19th, 2024 has changed everything we believed about the natural world and what exists beyond it. We'd started our hike at dawn, planning to reach the Arch Rock before the weekend crowds arrived. The morning was cold and foggy, that thick mountain mist that turns everything gray and makes distances impossible to judge. Sarah was ahead of me, setting the pace as she usually does, when she stopped abruptly at one of the steep switchbacks about 2 miles up the trail. "James," she said quietly, her voice strange, "there's a little girl up ahead." I came up beside her and looked. Standing at the next switchback, maybe 30 yards up the trail, was a child, a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress, the kind you'd see in photographs from the 60s or 70s, white with a floral pattern, slightly too large for her small frame. Her dark hair hung in 2 braids, and she was barefoot, despite the cold October morning. "Hey there," I called out. "Are you lost? Where are your parents?" The girl didn't respond immediately. She just stood there, perfectly still, staring down at us, with an expression I couldn't read. Then she spoke, her voice clear, despite the distance and the muffling fog. "Don't go there," she said, pointing up the trail behind her. "He woke up." Sarah and I exchanged glances. "Who woke up, sweetheart?" Sarah called. "Is someone hurt up there?" "He woke up," the girl repeated, her voice flat, emotionless. "You have to go back. He's angry." I started up the trail toward her, concerned. No child should be out here alone, especially dressed like that in this weather. But as I climbed the switchback, as I came around the bend where she'd been standing, she was gone. Just gone. Vanished into the fog as completely as if she'd never been there. "Where did she go?" Sarah said, coming up behind me. "She was right here." We searched the area, calling out, looking for any sign of movement in the dense undergrowth that bordered the trail. Nothing. The fog pressed close around us, limiting visibility to maybe 20 feet, but there was nowhere for a child to hide on this section of trail. One side was a steep, rocky slope rising up, the other a sharp drop into the valley below. "We need to report this," I said, pulling out my phone. No signal, of course. We were too deep in the mountains. We hurried back down the trail to the parking area, where we found a ranger checking vehicles. His name tag read Morrison, and he listened to our story with an expression that started skeptical, but gradually shifted to something else, something that looked like recognition. "A little girl in a white dress with flowers?" he asked. "Dark hair in braids." "Yes," Sarah said. "You know about her?" Ranger Morrison was quiet for a moment, then gestured for us to follow him to the ranger station at the trailhead. Inside, he pulled out a file folder, yellowed with age, and opened it on the desk. Inside were photographs, black and white photos from 1972. And there, in the center of one image, was the girl we'd seen. Same dress, same braids, same serious expression. The caption read, Emily Patterson, age 9, disappeared September 14th, 1972. Emily Patterson and her family were hiking the Alum Cave Trail on September 14th, 1972, Morrison said quietly. There was a rock slide on the upper section near Arch Rock. Emily's parents made it down, but Emily didn't. They found her body 3 days later. She'd been caught in the slide. My skin went cold. That's impossible. We just saw her 20 minutes ago. Morrison nodded slowly. You're not the first. Every few years, someone reports seeing a little girl on that trail, always wearing that same dress, always warning people not to go up, always disappearing when they try to approach her. But why? Sarah asked. Why would she warn people? Because, Morrison said, pulling out another file. Every time someone reports seeing Emily, there's an incident on the upper trail within 48 hours. A rock slide, a tree falling, something dangerous, like she's trying to warn people away from whatever caused her death. He showed us incident reports spanning decades. October 1985, girls seen, rock slide, reported 2 days later. May 1998, girls seen, major tree, fall across trail. September 2011, girls seen, section of trail, collapsed. We need to close the upper trail, I said. If she's warning us about something. We did, Morrison interrupted. Sent a crew up this morning at first light to inspect the area. They found fresh cracks in the rock face near Arch Rock. Major instability. They're setting up barriers now. Without your report, we wouldn't have known to look. We drove back to our cabin in Gatlinburg that afternoon, shaken but trying to rationalize what we'd experienced. Maybe the girl had been real. Maybe she'd been a hiker's daughter who wandered off and happened to look like the old photos. Maybe the warning was a coincidence. But the next morning, Morrison called my cell phone. I thought you should know, he said. We went back to document the area where you saw the girl, took photographs, measurements. We found footprints, small footprints, bare feet, in fresh mud from last night's rain. Could have been from anyone, I said, but my voice was shaking. The prints start at the exact spot you described, Morrison continued. And they don't go anywhere. They just appear there in the fresh mud. 27 small footprints in a circle, like she'd been standing there waiting. Then they stop. No trail leading in, no trail leading out. Sarah was listening on speakerphone to her, and I saw her face go pale. There's one more thing, Morrison said. The rock slide happened this morning. Major collapse right where we found those cracks. If hikers had been on that trail, he trailed off. Emily saved lives yesterday. Again. We haven't hiked the Alum Cave Trail since that day. We still hike in the Smokies, still love these mountains, but we avoid that particular trail because we know now that Emily Patterson is still there, still standing watch on those switchbacks, still trying to protect hikers from the dangers she couldn't escape. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in, thick and gray, I think about that little girl in her white dress, standing alone on the trail for 52 years, warning strangers about dangers they can't see. I think about her cold feet on the mountain soil, about her patient vigil, about her voice saying he woke up with such certainty. I don't know who he is. I don't know what wakes up in those mountains, what Emily is warning us about. But I know that whatever it is, it's still there, waiting in the rocks and the earth. And Emily Patterson is still standing guard, still protecting the living, even though she's been dead for half a century. The rangers have stopped trying to explain her. They just accept that some trails in the Great Smoky Mountains have guardians, and Emily is one of them. And when hikers report seeing a little girl in an old-fashioned dress, the rangers listen and they check the trails, and sometimes they find dangers that would have killed people. Emily Patterson died on September 14th, 1972, but she never left the mountain. And maybe that's not a tragedy. Maybe that's grace. My name is Michael Hartley, and I'm a wildlife biologist working for the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation. I've spent the last 12 years studying elk populations in Carter County, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, and I thought I knew these forests better than anyone. I thought I understood every sound, every shadow, every trick that isolation and exhaustion could play on the human mind. I was wrong. It happened on November 7th, 2024, on a remote trail about 4 miles northwest of Hampton, Tennessee. I'd been tracking a tagged bull elk through an area locals call Bitter Creek Hollow, checking GPS coordinates and marking territorial scrapes. The afternoon was cold and gray, that particular kind of Appalachian gloom where the clouds sit so low in the valleys that you can barely tell where the fog ends and the sky begins. I was alone, as I usually am during field work. My truck was parked 3 miles back on a Forest Service road, and I had maybe 2 hours of daylight left. I was crouched beside a fresh scrape, taking photographs and soil samples, when I heard it. Michael, my brother's voice, clear as day, coming from the tree line about 50 yards to my left. I stood up slowly, my camera still in hand, and looked toward the dense stand of hemlock and rhododendron. The forest was dark there, impenetrable, the kind of thick mountain vegetation that creates its own twilight, even at midday. "David," I called out. "That you?" But it couldn't be David. My brother lived in Knoxville, 43 miles southwest of where I stood. I'd talked to him on the phone that very morning before heading into the field. There was no reason for him to be out here. No way he could have found this specific location without the GPS coordinates I'd logged in my field notebook. Silence. Just the whisper of wind through bare branches and the distant trickle of water over stones. I waited, listening. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe it was another researcher, someone whose voice happened to sound like David's. Sound does strange things in these hollows, bouncing off ridges and creating echoes that can fool even experienced woodsmen. Then it came again. Michael. The exact same tone, the exact same inflection. Not the way David would actually say my name, with that slight upward lilt at the end like he was asking a question. This was flat, emotionless, mechanical. Just my name spoken with a perfect clarity and absolutely no warmth. My heart started to beat faster. Something was very wrong here. "Who's there?" I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "Identify yourself." Michael. Closer now. Maybe 30 yards into the forest. And I realized something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The voice wasn't coming from ground level. It was coming from about 7 or 8 feet up, as if someone impossibly tall was standing in the undergrowth, or as if the voice itself was floating disembodied through the trees. I took a step backward, my hand moving instinctively to the bear spray clipped to my belt. In 12 years of field work, I'd never felt fear like this. I'd encountered black bears at close range, stumbled across wildcats, even interrupted what I'm pretty sure was an illegal marijuana operation. But this was different. This triggered something primal, something that bypassed rational thought and went straight to the oldest parts of my brain, screaming, "Danger! Predator! Run!" Michael! At the tree line now, right at the edge of the forest, hidden by the dense vegetation, but so close I should have been able to see whoever was speaking. The voice maintained that same flat, emotionless quality, like a recording being played back, like something that had learned to mimic human speech but didn't understand the emotion behind it. I grabbed my field pack and started walking quickly back down the trail, fighting the urge to run. Every wildlife biologist knows that running triggers chase instincts in predators. You never run from a bear. You never run from a mountain lion. You back away slowly, make yourself look big, make noise. But what do you do when you don't know what's hunting you? Michael, behind me now. The voice had moved somehow, circling around to the opposite side of the trail, and it was closer, maybe 20 feet away, just beyond the tree line that bordered the narrow path. I walked faster, my boots crunching on fallen leaves, my breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with fear. Michael. 15 feet. I could hear branches moving now, could hear something large pushing through the undergrowth, snapping twigs, disturbing the dense vegetation. But I still couldn't see it. Couldn't see who or what was calling my name in my brother's voice. Michael. 10 feet away, right beside me, keeping pace as I walked, hidden by the rhododendron thickets that grew in impenetrable walls along this stretch of trail. Michael, right in my ear. So close I could feel breath on my neck, hot and fetid, smelling like decay and wet earth and things that should be buried. I ran. I abandoned every bit of training, every protocol, and I ran like my life depended on it. My field pack bounced against my spine. My camera swung wildly on its strap. My boots hammered the trail. Behind me, I heard crashing through the forest, heard something pursuing me. And the voice kept calling, "Michael, Michael, Michael, Michael," over and over in that same flat monotone. No faster despite the chase, no emotion despite the violence of the pursuit. And beneath the voice, I could hear footsteps. That's when true terror set in, because the footsteps were wrong. They were too heavy, each impact shaking the ground like something massive was striking the earth. They were too far apart, covering distances that no human stride could match. And they made sounds that footsteps shouldn't make, the crack of branches breaking, the groan of young trees bending, the deep thud of enormous weight compressing the forest floor. I risked a glance backward and immediately wished I hadn't. Something was there, something dark and massive, moving through the trees on two legs, but far too large to be human. It was maybe 8 or 9 feet tall, its proportions all wrong, its movements jerky and unnatural like stop-motion animation. I couldn't see details, just a dark shape against the darker forest. But I could see enough to know that whatever was chasing me wasn't my brother, wasn't human, wasn't anything that belonged in the natural world. Michael. I veered off the trail, crashing through undergrowth, thorns tearing at my jacket and face. I had no plan except to escape, to put distance between myself and that thing, to survive the next minute and the next and the next. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but terror kept me moving, adrenaline pushing me beyond any endurance I thought I possessed. Then I saw lights ahead, headlights, a vehicle on the Forest Service road. I burst out of the tree line, waving my arms, and the truck skidded to a stop. 2 rangers jumped out, hands moving to their service weapons. "Something's chasing me," I gasped, pointing back at the forest. "In the trees. Something wrong." They grabbed flashlights and moved toward the tree line, speaking into their radios. But when we all looked back at the forest, there was nothing, just silence and shadows and the last gray light of afternoon. The rangers searched the area while I sat in their truck, shaking uncontrollably. They found my GPS unit abandoned on the trail. They found tracks in the soft earth, massive depressions that they photographed but couldn't identify. They found broken branches and disturbed undergrowth, showing a path of pursuit through the forest. But they never found what made those tracks. I called David that night from my apartment in Elizabethton. He answered on the second ring, confused why I was calling so late. "Were you in Carter County today?" I asked, knowing the answer, but needing to hear it. "Carter County?" "No, man, I've been home all day. Why?" I told him. I told him everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You need to come stay with me for a few days," he finally said. "Get out of the mountains. Get some rest." But I can't rest, because I know now that something lives in these mountains. Something old and wrong that's learned to hunt using the voices of people we love. Something that mimics perfectly but without understanding, repeating words in flat monotones because it doesn't comprehend emotion, only knows that the sounds draw us closer. I still work in Carter County, but I never work alone anymore. I never venture off established trails. I carry a satellite phone, a GPS beacon, and more gear than I probably need. And if I ever hear a familiar voice calling my name from the forest, I don't respond, don't investigate, don't even pause. I just walk away. Because I know what's waiting in the trees, and I know it's still looking for me. My name is Thomas Brennan, and I live in a cabin off Tunnel Ridge Road in eastern Kentucky, right on the edge of Daniel Boone National Forest. I've been here for 8 years, ever since my divorce, and I've grown to love the solitude, the quiet evenings with just me and my German Shepherd, Duke. We walk the same trail every night, a 2-mile loop that skirts the forest boundary before circling back home. What happened on the night of November 3rd has changed everything. I still take Duke for walks, but never after dark. Never on that trail, and never without constantly looking over my shoulder. It was around 10:30 p.m. when we headed out. Later than usual because I'd been working late, finishing up a report for the Forestry Service where I work as a consultant. The temperature had dropped into the 40s, and a light fog was settling into the hollows, giving everything a soft, dreamlike quality in the beam of my flashlight. Duke was excited, pulling at his leash, like he always does for the first 100 yards, until he settles into a comfortable pace beside me. We took our usual route, heading east along the old logging road that parallels Redbird Creek. The forest was quiet that night, unusually quiet. No owls, no rustling of nocturnal animals, just the sound of our footsteps on the gravel path and Duke's occasional sniffing at interesting scents. We were maybe half a mile from the cabin when Duke stopped suddenly. Not the casual pause of a dog investigating a smell, but an abrupt, rigid halt, his entire body going tense, his ears flattened against his head, and a low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. I'd had Duke for 6 years, and I'd never heard him make that sound before. "What is it, boy?" I said, following his gaze toward the tree line to our left. The forest was dark, impenetrable, beyond the reach of my flashlight. I swept the beam across the trees, looking for eyeshine that might indicate a deer or coyote. Nothing. Just the darkness and the twisted shapes of bare branches. Duke's growl intensified, and I felt the fur along his spine bristle under my hand. "Easy, Duke, it's okay." But it wasn't okay, because that's when I heard them. Footsteps, distinct, deliberate footsteps coming from the forest, moving parallel to the trail. I stopped walking, and Duke pressed against my leg, still growling. I listened, holding my breath. The footsteps had stopped too. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and swallowed by the fog. "Someone there?" No answer, just silence and the rapid beating of my heart. I started walking again, faster now, Duke trotting beside me. And the footsteps started again too. Not behind us, not ahead of us, but beside us, maybe 30 feet into the forest. And they were synchronized with mine. When my right foot hit the ground a second later, I'd hear an echo of that step from the darkness. When my left foot came down, the echo followed. Step, echo, step, echo, step, echo. The delay was too perfect, too precise to be coincidence. Whatever was out there was deliberately matching my pace, mimicking my movements. I stopped again. The echo stopped. I took one step. The echo took one step. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound authoritative, but hearing the fear crack my voice. "This is private property." The only response was Duke's continuous growling and my own ragged breathing. I wanted to run, but something told me that would be the worst thing I could do. Instead, I walked faster, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I moved. The footsteps kept pace, that maddening echo continuing, step after step after step. Then they started getting closer. The sound was moving through the forest, angling towards the trail. Branches snapped, leaves crunched. And those footsteps, those horrible, synchronized footsteps, were closing the distance between us. Duke suddenly lunged forward, nearly pulling the leash from my hand. He wanted to run, and I didn't argue. We ran together, sprinting down that trail, my flashlight beam showing brief glimpses of the path ahead. Behind us, the footsteps followed, no longer synchronized, but pounding, heavy, rapid, pursuing us. I could hear breathing now, harsh and labored, coming from something large. The sound reminded me of a horse or a bull, that deep, powerful exhalation of something with massive lungs. We burst out of the tree line onto the open ground near my cabin, and I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. Before getting the door open, Duke shot inside, and I followed, slamming the door and throwing the deadbolt. I stood there in the darkness of my living room, listening. The footsteps had stopped at the edge of the clearing. I could hear that breathing, heavy and rhythmic, coming from the darkness maybe 50 feet away. I didn't turn on any lights. I just stood there, gripping Duke's collar, staring out the window at nothing but darkness. The breathing continued for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my chair with my hunting rifle across my lap. Duke curled at my feet, both of us staring at the door until dawn finally broke. When morning came, I went outside to investigate. I needed to know if I'd imagined it, if fear and darkness had played tricks on my mind. What I found made me wish I'd stayed inside. In the soft earth along the trail, illuminated by morning sunlight, were footprints. Clear, distinct human footprints. Bare feet, large, maybe size 13 or 14. They ran parallel to the trail for about a quarter mile, exactly where I'd heard those echoing steps. But there was something wrong with them. The stride length was impossible, maybe 6 or 7 feet between each print. No human could walk with a stride that long, and the depth of the impressions suggested enormous weight, far more than any person should carry. The prints followed the trail all the way to where we'd started running. Then they cut toward the trail, multiple prints showing where whatever it was had pursued us. They stopped at the edge of my clearing, right where I'd heard the breathing stop. And there was one more thing that made my blood run cold. Next to those human footprints, running parallel to them for the entire distance, were Duke's paw prints from the night before. Whatever had been out there had been following us the whole time, matching not just my steps, but our entire path. I reported it to the local sheriff, who came out and looked at the prints with a grim expression. He took photographs, measurements, then pulled me aside. "You're not the first," he said quietly. "Last year, 3 different people reported similar experiences on these trails. Footsteps that echo theirs. Something following them that they can't see. We've never found any evidence before now." "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head. "Don't know. Some folks say it's just people playing pranks. Others say it's something that's been in these hills for a long time, longer than any of us. The footprints stayed visible for 2 days before rain washed them away. But I've stopped walking that trail at night. I've stopped walking any trail at night, because I know now that something lives in the Daniel Boone National Forest. Something that walks on 2 legs like a human, but isn't human. Something that watches and waits and follows. And sometimes, late at night when the fog settles into the hollows, I hear footsteps outside my cabin, walking back and forth along the tree line. Never coming closer, never leaving, just pacing, waiting. Duke hears them too. He no longer sleeps peacefully. He sits by the window, ears alert, watching the darkness. And sometimes he growls that low warning growl, and I know it's out there again. Whatever it is, it hasn't forgotten us, and I don't think it ever will. The following journal entries were discovered on December 8, 2024, in a waterproof notebook found approximately 2.7 miles into the Nantahala National Forest, western North Carolina. The notebook belonged to Connor Hayes, age 31, reported missing on November 22, 2024. Search efforts continue. November 20th, 2024. My name is Connor Hayes, and I'm keeping this journal as a record of my hiking trip through the ridges near Nantahala National Forest. I arrived in the small town of Robbinsville yesterday evening, and the locals have been nothing but welcoming, though I noticed something strange at the general store on Tallulah Road. An elderly man, maybe 75 or 80, approached me while I was buying supplies. His name was Earl, and he had the kind of weathered face you only get from spending a lifetime in these mountains. He asked where I was planning to hike, and when I mentioned the old mining trails near Copper Ridge, his expression changed completely. "You be careful up there," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Especially after dark. If you see a light between the trees, don't follow it, no matter what." I asked him what he meant, and he glanced around the store as if checking who might be listening. "The miner's lantern," he said. "Been appearing in those woods for near about 100 years now. Used to be copper mines up there back in the 20s. One of the miners, they say he went missing down in the shafts. Never found his body. But his lantern, it still shows up sometimes, floating between the trees." I smiled politely, thinking it was just local color, the kind of ghost story every small town has. But Earl grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "I'm serious, son. My brother Tommy, he saw it back in '68. Followed it into the woods. We found his campsite 3 days later. Everything was still there. His tent, his truck, everything except Tommy. Never saw him again." The way he said it, the pain still fresh in his voice after all those years, made me uncomfortable. I thanked him for the warning and left, but his words stayed with me. November 21st, 2024, I set up camp this afternoon in a clearing about 2 miles from the old Copper Ridge Mine entrance. The forest here is incredibly dense, old-growth hemlocks and oaks that block out most of the sunlight even during the day. The silence is absolute, broken only by the occasional bird call or rustle of wind through the branches. I spent the day exploring the area, taking photographs of the abandoned mine equipment scattered throughout the forest. There's something haunting about these places, the way nature slowly reclaims what humans built. Rusted ore carts, collapsed timber supports, all gradually disappearing under moss and vines. As evening approached, I made my way back to camp and started a fire. The temperature drops fast up here in the mountains, and I was grateful for the warmth. I made dinner, wrote in this journal, and was planning to turn in early when I heard something that made me look up. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps in the undergrowth, circling my camp just beyond the firelight. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but received no answer. The footsteps continued for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped abruptly. I checked the perimeter of my camp with my flashlight, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone having been there. Probably just a deer or bear. I'm telling myself that anyway. November 22nd, 2024, 2:47 a.m. I can't sleep. Something woke me about 20 minutes ago, and now I'm sitting in my tent writing this by headlamp because I need to document what I'm seeing. There's a light outside, not a flashlight, not a campfire. It's an old-fashioned lantern, the kind that burns kerosene, and it's hanging in the air about 50 feet from my tent. Just hanging there, suspended between 2 hemlock trees with nothing supporting it. The flame inside flickers and dances, casting orange light on the surrounding trees. But there's no one holding it. No rope, no branch, nothing. It's simply floating in midair, swaying gently as if someone just set it down. I know what Earl said. I know I should stay in my tent, zip it up, and wait for morning. But I can't look away from it. There's something mesmerizing about that light. Something that makes me want to go closer, to understand what I'm seeing. The logical part of my brain is screaming that this isn't possible, that lanterns don't float in midair, that there has to be an explanation. But another part of me, a deeper, more primitive part, is telling me to run. I'm going to investigate. I have to know what this is. If I don't write anything else after this, if something happens, at least there will be a record of what I saw. November 22nd, 2024, 3:15 a.m. I'm back in my tent, and my hands are shaking so badly I can barely write. I need to get this down while it's still fresh, while I can still think clearly. I approached the lantern. I walked slowly, my flashlight in one hand and my phone in the other, trying to record what I was seeing. The lantern remained where it was, that steady orange flame burning inside the soot-stained glass. As I got closer, I could see it was genuinely old, probably from the 1920s or 30s, exactly the kind a miner would have carried. When I was maybe 10 feet away, I heard it, breathing. Heavy, labored breathing coming from somewhere behind the lantern, from the darkness beyond its light. It sounded like someone enormous, someone struggling to draw air into damaged lungs. Each breath was accompanied by a wet, rattling sound that made my skin crawl. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone there?" The breathing stopped. For a moment, there was absolute silence, so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then the lantern moved. It didn't swing or sway. It simply shifted position, gliding smoothly through the air, moving deeper into the forest. And without thinking, without any conscious decision, I followed it. I know how stupid that sounds. I know I should have run back to my tent, packed up, and driven away. But something compelled me forward, some force I couldn't resist. The lantern drifted between the trees, always maintaining that same distance ahead of me, its light showing me the path. We walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 or 20 minutes. The breathing started again, but now it was behind me, following at the same pace. I could hear footsteps too, heavy and deliberate, crushing branches and disturbing leaves. But every time I spun around to look, there was nothing there, just darkness and trees. Then I realized where the lantern was leading me. I could see the old mine entrance ahead, a black opening in the hillside supported by rotting timbers. The lantern descended toward it, and I stopped. That's when everything changed. The breathing behind me grew louder, closer, and I finally understood the terrible truth. Whatever was making that sound had been hurting me, driving me toward the mine like prey. I turned to run, and the lantern shot upward, positioning itself directly above me. That's when I ran harder than I've ever run in my life. But the lantern followed, staying right behind me, and its light, its horrible light, only illuminated the ground directly at my feet. Everything else was pitch darkness. I couldn't see the trees, couldn't see where I was going. I could only see that small circle of ground lit by the lantern, and I had to trust that my feet would find purchase, that I wouldn't run headlong into a tree or off a cliff. The breathing followed too, sometimes close enough that I could feel hot breath on my neck, smell something rotten and ancient. Branches tore at my face and arms. I tripped over roots and rocks, fell twice, scrambled back to my feet, and kept running. The lantern's light never wavered, never gave me more than that tiny circle of visibility. I don't know how I found my way back to camp. Maybe it let me. Maybe it was done playing with me, at least for tonight. But when I finally saw my tent, I sprinted the last 50 yards, dove inside, and zipped it shut. The lantern stopped at the edge of my campsite, hovering there, and I could see through the tent fabric that something enormous was standing behind it, blocking out the starlight. It stayed there for almost an hour. Then finally, the light went out, and whatever was out there left. I've been sitting here since, too terrified to move, writing this down. Dawn should come in about 3 hours. I just need to survive until dawn. Then I can pack up and leave this place forever. November 22nd, 2024, 6:30 a.m. Something's wrong. The sun should have risen by now, but it's still dark outside. Not the darkness of night, but something else. Something thicker and more oppressive. The lantern is back. I can see it through the tent, but this time it's not alone. There are dozens of them now, maybe hundreds, all floating between the trees, creating a forest of orange lights that stretches as far as I can see. And behind each one I can hear breathing, that same wet, labored sound, multiplied until it fills the air like a chorus. I tried to start my car, but the battery is dead. My phone has no signal and is down to 8% battery. I'm writing this by its light because my flashlight is gone. I must have dropped it during the chase last night. The lanterns are moving closer, tightening their circle around my tent. I can hear footsteps now, many footsteps all around me. Something is scratching at the tent fabric, long, slow scrapes that sound like fingernails or claws or something worse. Earl tried to warn me. God, he tried to warn me, and I didn't listen. I followed the light like every other fool who's disappeared in these woods. And now I understand why no one ever came back. They're still here, all of them. The miners who went missing in the shafts, Tommy from 68, probably dozens or hundreds more, stretching back over the decades. They're all still here, and they're not alone. The scratching has stopped. The tent is opening. I didn't unzip it. Something is opening it from the outside, and the lantern light is spilling in, orange and flickering and wrong. I can see a hand now pushing through the opening. And it's not a human hand anymore, hasn't been for a very long time. I'm sorry to whoever finds this journal. I'm sorry I didn't listen. Don't follow the lantern light. No matter what you see, no matter how curious you get. The minds have been hungry for a very long time, and they're always looking for more company. The hand is reaching for me now, and behind it, I can see a face, or what used to be a face, before the darkness underground changed it into something else entirely. I understand now why they need the lanterns, why they carry those lights through the forest. It's the only way they can see anymore, after so many years in the absolute blackness of those flooded shafts. And they're so very lonely down there in the dark. I can hear them whispering my name now, welcoming me home to the mines where I'll carry my own lantern soon enough, walking through these woods for the next 100 years, looking for the next curious fool who won't listen to warnings. The hand has my wrist now, and its grip is cold as stone and twice as strong, pulling me forward into the light that leads only down into the earth, where the copper veins run deep and the darkness never ends. The journal ends here. The final 8 pages have been torn out. The notebook was found inside Hayes's tent, which remained fully intact and properly secured. All of Connor Hayes's belongings were present except for his flashlight and phone, which were never recovered. The notebook itself shows significant water damage and what appears to be soil staining consistent with mined sediment. 3 deep scratches mar the back cover. Multiple search operations have been conducted in the Copper Ridge area, but no trace of Connor Hayes has been found. The case remains open. My name is Derek Caldwell, and I still have that photograph on my phone. I've thought about deleting it 1,000 times, but something stops me every time my thumb hovers over the trash icon. Maybe it's proof that what happened to me at Summersville Lake wasn't just exhaustion or fear playing tricks on my mind. Maybe it's a reminder never to go back. I'm a freelance outdoor photographer specializing in fishing and camping content for various outdoor lifestyle magazines. In early October, I drove down to Summersville Lake in West Virginia to shoot a series on autumn bass fishing. The lake is massive, over 2,800 acres of crystal clear water surrounded by the Appalachian Mountains. It's beautiful, isolated, and during the off-season you can go days without seeing another soul. I set up camp on a secluded stretch of shoreline, accessible only by a narrow dirt road off Carnifex Ferry Road. The nearest town, Summersville, was about 12 miles away. My campsite was perfect, a small clearing surrounded by oak and maple trees, their leaves already turning brilliant shades of orange and red, with a rocky beach that gave easy access to the water. The first day was uneventful. I spent the afternoon fishing, caught a decent-sized smallmouth bass, and took photos of the sunset over the lake. The water was so clear you could see straight down to the rocky bottom, even in 15 feet of water. That clarity should have been beautiful, but there was something unsettling about it. The way you could see everything beneath the surface. Nothing hidden, nothing mysterious. That night I made dinner over my camp stove and sat by the fire, editing photos on my laptop. The silence was absolute except for the gentle lapping of water against the shore and the occasional crack of the fire. No owls, no crickets, nothing. I remember thinking how strange that was, how even the insects seemed to have abandoned this stretch of shoreline. I woke before dawn the next morning, planning to catch the sunrise over the lake. The best fishing happens in those early hours, and I wanted to get some shots of the mist rising off the water. I grabbed my phone, my fishing rod, and walked down to the rocky beach. The pre-dawn light was extraordinary, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink. The lake was perfectly still, a mirror reflecting the mountains. I cast my line a few times, then decided to take a selfie with the lake in the background. I held my phone at arm's length, framed the shot with the sunrise behind me, and took the picture. I didn't look at it then. I pocketed my phone and went back to fishing, catching 3 decent bass over the next hour as the sun climbed above the ridgeline. By 8 in the morning, I was back at camp, cooking breakfast and uploading photos to my laptop. That's when I saw it. I was scrolling through the morning shots when I came to the selfie I'd taken on the beach. And there, standing directly behind me, maybe 10 feet back, was a figure. A tall figure, easily 7 feet or more, wearing what looked like a long dark cloak or robe. The hood was up, obscuring any features, but the shape was unmistakably human, or at least human-shaped. My blood went cold. I'd been alone on that beach, completely alone. I would have heard someone approach across the rocks, would have seen them in my peripheral vision. But there it was, crystal clear in the photograph, standing motionless behind me. I zoomed in on the image, my hands shaking. The figure's cloak seemed to be wet, dripping, as if it had just emerged from the water. But the strangest thing was the posture. It wasn't just standing there. It was leaning forward, slightly, as if looking over my shoulder, as if it had been watching me take the photograph. I told myself it had to be a trick of the light, a shadow from the trees, something my tired brain had misinterpreted. But the more I looked at it, the more defined the shape became. I could see the folds in the fabric, see where water had pooled at its feet, darkening the rocks. I grabbed my phone and my car keys, seriously considering packing up and leaving. But it was broad daylight, the sun was shining, and I had 3 more days of shooting scheduled. I couldn't abandon a paid assignment because of one weird photograph. I'm a rational person. There had to be an explanation. I spent the rest of the day fishing farther down the shoreline, away from my camp, constantly looking over my shoulder. Every shadow between the trees made my heart race. Every ripple on the water made me turn, but I saw nothing unusual. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing. That changed when I returned to camp. As I approached my tent, I saw them immediately. Wet footprints leading from the water's edge up to my tent, circling it once, then leading back to the water. But they weren't normal footprints. They were too long, too narrow, and there was something wrong with the spacing. The stride was too wide, as if whatever made them had legs far longer than any human should have. The prints were still damp, water pooling in the impressions they'd left in the soft earth. Whatever had made them had been here recently, maybe while I was down the shoreline, maybe while it was still daylight. I checked my tent. Nothing had been disturbed. My gear was exactly where I'd left it, but the footprints were undeniable, and they'd come within inches of my tent's entrance. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in my camp chair, my back to the fire, a large hunting knife on my lap, watching the water. The lake was perfectly calm, reflecting the stars, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move, but nothing happened. The night passed slowly, agonizingly, and when dawn finally came, I was exhausted, but alive. I should have left then. I know that now, but I kept telling myself I was being irrational, that there was an explanation, that I couldn't abandon my assignment over some footprints and a weird photograph. So I stayed. The 3rd day, I barely fished at all. I stayed in camp, pretending to organize my gear, but really just watching the water. The silence continued to bother me. No birds sang in the trees, no fish jumped in the shallows. It was as if the entire area was holding its breath, waiting. That night, I finally fell asleep around midnight. Exhaustion, overcoming my fear. I don't know how long I slept, maybe an hour, maybe 2. Then the sound woke me. Splash. Not a small sound. Not a fish jumping or a rock falling. A large splash, like something massive entering the water. My eyes snapped open, and through the thin fabric of my tent, I could see light. Not firelight. My fire had burned out hours ago. This was moonlight, bright and silver, illuminating something on the lake. I unzipped my tent slowly, quietly, my heart hammering so hard I thought my ribs might crack. And then I saw it. The figure was standing in the water, maybe 30 feet from shore, the lake coming up to its knees. It was exactly as it had appeared in the photograph. Tall, impossibly tall. wearing that long, dark cloak that seemed to be part of the water itself, dripping and flowing. The hood was still up, but now I could see what was underneath. Nothing. There was nothing under that hood, just darkness, a void where a face should have been. And it was looking at me. I don't know how I knew that. It had no eyes, no features I could discern, but I felt its attention like a physical weight, pressing against me, suffocating. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Me, half crouched at my tent entrance, it standing motionless in the water. Then it moved, one step forward, water sloshing around its legs. Then another step, coming toward shore, coming toward me. I didn't think. I ran. I grabbed my car keys and ran, leaving everything else behind. My tent, my gear, my expensive camera equipment, everything. I ran through the trees, branches tearing at my face and arms, my lungs burning until I reached my truck. I fumbled with the keys, dropped them, picked them up, finally got the door open, and the engine started. As I tore down that dirt road, gravel spraying behind me, I looked in my rearview mirror. There, at the edge of the trees, illuminated by my taillights, stood the figure. It had followed me from the lake, moving impossibly fast, and now it stood, watching me leave. I drove straight through to Charleston, didn't stop until I was surrounded by lights and people and noise. I checked into a motel and sat on the bed, shaking until sunrise. I never went back for my gear. I hired someone local to retrieve it, gave him explicit instructions not to go alone and not to go at night. He found everything exactly as I'd left it, undisturbed. But he mentioned something that made my blood run cold again. "Weird thing," he said over the phone. "Your tent was soaked inside. Everything was dripping wet, like someone had dumped gallons of lake water in there. But it hadn't rained, and there weren't no holes in the fabric." I still have that photograph on my phone. I've shown it to exactly 3 people: my brother, my therapist, and a folklore professor at West Virginia University who specializes in Appalachian legends. The professor listened to my story, studied the photograph for a long time, then handed my phone back without a word. "What is it?" I finally asked. He shook his head. Summersville Lake is relatively new, created by the Army Corps of Engineers in 1966. But before the dam, before the lake, there were several small communities in that valley. They were all relocated, their homes demolished, their cemeteries moved. Officially moved anyway. He paused, choosing his words carefully. There are stories, local stories about things that were left behind when they flooded the valley. Not just buildings, but older things. Things that had been there long before the settlers arrived. The Cherokee used to avoid certain parts of that valley. They said there were watchers there, guardians of some kind, that didn't take kindly to being disturbed. I never went back to Summersville Lake. I still take outdoor assignments, still fish and camp, but never in West Virginia, and never alone. I check every photograph I take now, sometimes obsessively, looking for things that shouldn't be there, because I know now that some places aren't empty just because you can't see anyone. Some places have residents that don't show themselves until they want to be seen. And once they've seen you, once they've let you see them, they don't forget. That photograph is still on my phone, and sometimes late at night I look at it. The figure is always there, exactly as it was that morning, standing behind me on that rocky beach. But sometimes I swear, just for a moment, the angle is slightly different. The head turned just a fraction more toward the camera, the stance just a bit closer than it was before. I tell myself it's my imagination. It has to be. Because the alternative, that it's still watching me, still following me through that photograph, is something I can't accept and still remain sane. But I know one thing for certain. I'll never delete that photograph. Because as long as it's on my phone, as long as I can see where it is, I know it's not standing right behind me in the darkness. At least that's what I tell myself. My name is Marcus Treadwell, and I need to tell someone what happened at our house on Cutter's Ridge Road before I lose my mind completely. Before I start believing that what we heard, what we saw, was somehow normal. It wasn't normal. Nothing about those 3 weeks in October was normal. We moved to eastern Tennessee in late September. My wife, Sarah, our daughter, Emma, who was 6 at the time, and me. The house was a steal, or so we thought. A small 2-story place nestled at the base of a forested hill about 15 miles outside Cosby, right where the land starts climbing toward the Cherokee National Forest. The realtor, a nervous woman named Patricia who kept checking her watch, mentioned the house had been empty for 18 months. The previous owners had moved suddenly, left most of their furniture behind. When I asked why, Patricia just said something vague about a job opportunity in Florida and changed the subject. The house itself was charming in that rustic Appalachian way. Wood siding painted white but weathered to gray in places, a wraparound porch, windows that rattled when the wind picked up. Behind the property, maybe 50 yards out, the forest started its climb up the hillside. Dense hardwoods, mostly oak and hickory, thick enough that you couldn't see more than 20 feet into the trees, even in daylight. We spent the first 2 weeks settling in. I was working remotely for a software company in Nashville, so the isolation suited me fine. Sarah had taken a part-time position at the elementary school in town, and Emma was adjusting to first grade, better than we'd hoped. Everything felt right. Everything felt normal. Until the night of October 14th. I remember the date exactly because it was Emma's birthday. We'd had a small party, just the 3 of us, cake and presents on the dining room table. Emma had gone to bed around 8:30, tired but happy. Sarah and I stayed up watching a movie, some thriller I can't even remember now. We turned in around 11. At 12:17, I woke up to the sound of whistling. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe from the road. But as I lay there in the darkness, listening, I realized it was closer than that, much closer. It was coming from right outside our bedroom window, which faced the side yard and the forest beyond. The melody was simple. Just 6 notes repeated over and over. A rising scale, then 2 notes descending. It sounded almost cheerful, like a children's song. But there was something off about the tone. Too perfect, too steady, like it was being played on an instrument rather than whistled by a human mouth. Sarah stirred beside me. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said. "Stay here." I got out of bed and went to the window. Our bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and the window looked out over the side yard where we'd stacked firewood against the house. The moon was nearly full that night, bright enough to see clearly. I pulled back the curtain and looked out. Nothing. The yard was empty. The tree line was still and dark, but the whistling continued, so close it sounded like whoever was making it was standing directly below our window. I went downstairs and out onto the porch, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen on the way. The October air was cold, my breath misting in the beam of the flashlight. I swept the light across the side yard, then walked around the entire perimeter of the house. Nothing. No footprints in the damp grass. No sign of anyone. But as I stood there at the back corner of the house, shining my light into the trees, the whistling moved. It had been on the side of the house, and now it was coming from the back, near the tree line, the same 6 notes, over and over. "Who's out there?" I called out, trying to sound authoritative rather than terrified. The whistling stopped. The silence that followed was worse somehow, oppressive and waiting. I stood there for a full minute, listening to my own heartbeat, before I went back inside and locked the door. Sarah was waiting at the top of the stairs. "Well?" "Nothing," I said. "Probably just some kids messing around." But I didn't believe that, and from the look on her face, neither did she. The whistling came back the next night at the same time. 12:17 exactly. I checked my phone to be sure. This time it started at the front of the house and slowly, methodically, moved around the entire perimeter. It took maybe 10 minutes to complete the circuit. That same simple melody, never varying, never stopping to take a breath. I called the local sheriff's office. A deputy named Hutchins came out around 9 the next morning, took a statement, walked around the property. He was polite, but clearly skeptical. "Could be kids," he said, echoing my own hollow excuse. "Could be someone with a grudge against the previous owners, doesn't know they're gone. I'll have a patrol swing by at night for the next week, see if they spot anything." That night, Sarah and I stayed up, watching from the upstairs window. At 12:17, right on schedule, the whistling started. But this time, we were ready. Sarah called 911 while I ran outside with my phone, recording video. The whistling was coming from the tree line. I could pinpoint it exactly, maybe 30 yards into the woods. I ran toward it, my phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness, stumbling over roots and rocks. The whistling stopped the moment I entered the trees. I stood there, panting, sweeping my light through the forest. Nothing. No movement. No sound except my own ragged breathing and the distant hoot of an owl. I checked the video later. You could hear the whistling clearly on the recording, but when I reached the trees, there was nothing but dead silence and the sound of my footsteps. The deputy called back the next day. The patrol had driven by 3 times during the night. Hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. On the 4th night, I set up game cameras. I had 6 of them, motion-activated trail cameras I'd bought for a hunting trip I never took. I positioned them in a ring around the house, covering every approach from the woods. If something was out there, if someone was doing this, the cameras would catch them. That night, the whistling came again. Same time, same melody. But this time, it did something different. After circling the house twice, it stopped at the back door, just stopped. And then very slowly, the doorknob began to turn. I was downstairs by then, had been waiting in the kitchen with a baseball bat. Sarah was upstairs with Emma, who thankfully was still sleeping through all of this. I watched that doorknob rotate, heard the soft click as whoever was outside tested the lock. "I've called the police," I shouted. "They're on their way." The doorknob stopped moving. The whistling resumed, but now it sounded different. Angry somehow, though the melody was the same. It moved away from the door, around the side of the house and faded into the distance. I checked the cameras the next morning. My hands were shaking as I pulled the SD cards and loaded them onto my laptop. Sarah stood behind me, her hand on my shoulder. 6 cameras, 12 hours of footage. Not a single frame showed anything unusual. The motion sensors had triggered dozens of times, deer mostly. 1 fox, a raccoon. But at 12:17, when the whistling had started, when we'd both heard it clear as day, when that doorknob had turned, the cameras showed nothing. Just empty yard, empty forest, not even a shadow. "This is wrong," Sarah said quietly. "Something is very wrong with this place." That night, we didn't sleep. We sat in the living room with every light on, Emma between us on the couch. She knew something was wrong by now, had heard us talking in worried whispers, had seen the fear in our eyes. At 12:17, the whistling started, but this time it wasn't outside. It was coming from below us, from the basement. I'd only been down to the basement once, when we first moved in. It was unfinished, just a concrete floor and stone walls, some old boxes left by the previous owners, a water heater in the corner. The stairs were steep and narrow, the single bulb at the bottom barely illuminating the space. I hadn't liked it then, and I'd avoided it since. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Don't go down there." But the whistling continued, that same infuriating 6-note melody echoing up through the floorboards. Emma started crying. I stood up, picked up the baseball bat. "Lock yourselves in the bathroom upstairs." "Do it now." Sarah didn't argue. She scooped up Emma and ran for the stairs. I heard the bathroom door slam, heard the lock click. I walked to the basement door. It was in the kitchen, a heavy wooden door with a simple latch lock. I'd checked it myself after the first night, made sure it was secure. It was still locked now. The whistling was louder, more insistent. I could hear it clearly through the door, could almost feel the vibration of it in the wood. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The basement stairs descended into darkness. The light bulb at the bottom was off, though I distinctly remembered it had been working when I was down there before. The whistling stopped. I fumbled for the light switch at the top of the stairs, flipped it. Nothing happened. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and started down the stairs. The temperature dropped with every step. By the time I reached the bottom, I could see my breath. The basement was exactly as I remembered it. Concrete floor, stone walls, boxes stacked in the corner. The water heater hummed quietly in its alcove. But something was different. The boxes, they'd been moved. They were no longer stacked neatly against the wall, but had been arranged in a circle in the center of the floor. And in the middle of that circle, scratched into the concrete with something sharp, were words. "He walks when we whistle." My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the phone. The light beam jerked across the walls, the ceiling, the dark corners of the basement. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Then from behind me, from the top of the stairs, the whistling started again. I spun around. The doorway at the top of the stairs was empty, but the sound was coming from up there, from the kitchen. 6 notes, rising and falling. And then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy footsteps moving across the kitchen floor, heading toward the stairs where Sarah and Emma were hiding. I ran, took those stairs 2 at a time, burst through the doorway into the kitchen. The whistling stopped. The footsteps stopped. The house was silent. I ran up to the 2nd floor. pounded on the bathroom door. "Sarah, open up!" The lock clicked, and the door opened. Sarah's face was white. "We heard it," she whispered. "We heard footsteps in the hallway, right outside the door. We left that night, threw some clothes in a bag, grabbed Emma, and drove straight to a hotel in Cosby. We didn't go back for 3 days. When we finally returned, it was mid-morning, bright sunshine streaming through the windows. I went down to the basement immediately. The boxes were back against the wall, neatly stacked, exactly as they'd been originally. The circle was gone. The concrete floor was smooth, unmarked, no scratched words, no sign that anything had been disturbed. But in one of the boxes, buried beneath old newspapers and books, I found something. A leather journal, old and water-stained. Inside, written in a shaky hand, was a dated entry from 1987. It started with a whistling every night at the same time. We thought it was Charlie from down the road playing pranks. But Charlie moved away in July. The whistling didn't stop. It got closer. It got inside. Last night I saw him, standing at the foot of our bed. Tall, too tall, thin like a scarecrow. His mouth was open, but the whistle came from somewhere else. From the walls, from the air itself. We're leaving tomorrow. If anyone finds this, don't stay here. Don't listen to the whistling. And whatever you do, don't go down to the basement after midnight. The entry wasn't signed. There was no name, no other information, just that one page, that one warning. We put the house up for sale the next day, took a loss on it, didn't care. A young couple bought it in November, seemed excited about the rustic charm and the proximity to the forest. I thought about warning them, thought about showing them the journal, telling them what happened. But what would I say? That we heard whistling? That boxes moved by themselves? That something walks through that house after midnight? They wouldn't have believed me. I'm not sure I'd believe me. We live in Knoxville now, in a suburban neighborhood, with streetlights and neighbors close enough to hear if you shout. Emma is doing better, doesn't wake up crying anymore. Sarah has stopped checking the locks 3 times before bed. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I drive out toward Cosby. I park on the main road and look up toward Cutter's Ridge, toward that little white house at the base of the hill. And sometimes, if the wind is right, I swear I can hear it. 6 notes, rising and falling, over and over again. The whistling never stops. It just waits for someone new to listen. My name is Tyler Brennan, and I'm 17 years old. What happened to me last summer in my grandfather's house in McDowell County, southwestern Virginia, still keeps me awake at night. I'm writing this down now because I need people to understand what's beneath those old coal town houses, what's been waiting there for decades in the darkness, under the floorboards. My parents sent me to stay with Grandpa Eugene for the summer after I got into some trouble back home in Richmond. Nothing serious, just typical teenage stupidity, but they thought spending time in the mountains would straighten me out. Grandpa lived alone in a house on Blackwell Street in a dying coal town called Stone Ridge. Population maybe 300 on a good day. The house was built in 1947, a simple company house that the mining corporation had sold to the workers after the mine closed in the 80s. I arrived on a humid June evening, the mountains pressing close around the narrow valley where Stone Ridge sat like a forgotten relic. The house was exactly what I expected. Peeling paint, sagging porch, surrounded by other identical houses in various states of decay. Half the homes on the street were abandoned, their windows dark and empty. Grandpa met me at the door, thin and weathered, his lungs permanently damaged from 30 years underground in the Stone Ridge No. 7 mine. He wheezed when he talked, a sound I'd eventually grow used to, though it never stopped being unsettling in the quiet of night. "Good to see you, boy," he said, patting my shoulder. "Hope you don't mind the old place." "She's not much, but she's home." The interior was Spartan, worn furniture, yellowed wallpaper, photographs of dead relatives on every surface. My room was upstairs, a small bedroom with a single window overlooking the overgrown backyard. The floorboards creaked with every step, and the whole house had that musty smell of age and decay. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. I spent my days exploring the abandoned mine buildings on the edge of town, taking photographs on my phone, trying to stave off the boredom. Grandpa and I fell into a routine. Breakfast at 7. He'd watch his shows while I read or play games on my phone. Dinner at 6, bed by 10. The silence of that town was oppressive, broken only by the occasional car passing through or the sound of Grandpa's breathing. Then on my 15th night there, I heard it for the first time. I'd gone to bed around 10:30, lying in the darkness, scrolling through social media on my phone. The house had settled into its usual nighttime sounds, the creak of old wood, the whisper of wind through the gaps in the siding, the distant rumble of Grandpa's snoring from downstairs. That's when I heard the crying. It was faint at first, barely audible beneath the ambient noise, a soft, muffled sobbing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I sat up, holding my breath, straining to locate the source. The crying continued, and I realized, with growing unease, that it was coming from beneath me, from under the floorboards. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it at the floor. The old wooden boards looked exactly as they always had, gaps between them showing nothing but darkness. But the crying persisted, a desperate, frightened sound that made my skin crawl. "Hello?" I called out softly, feeling ridiculous even as I did it. The crying stopped immediately. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. I waited, my heart pounding, but heard nothing more. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd imagined it, that the old house was playing tricks on me, and I fell into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, I mentioned it to Grandpa over breakfast. His face went pale. He set down his coffee cup with a trembling hand. "You heard crying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, from under my room. It was probably just pipes or something, right?" Grandpa was quiet for a long moment, his watery blue eyes distant. "Tyler, there's something you should know about this house, about all these houses in Stone Ridge." He told me that the mining company had built these homes quickly and cheaply in the 40s, right over the old mining tunnels. The tunnels ran beneath the entire town, a labyrinth of shafts and passages that had been abandoned and sealed after a series of cave-ins in the 30s. 11 men had died in those cave-ins. Their bodies never recovered. "Sometimes," Grandpa said, his voice hoarse, "folks in town hear things, sounds from under their houses. The old-timers say it's the miners who were lost, still down there in the dark. I laughed nervously, trying to dismiss it as superstition. But Grandpa didn't laugh. He just looked at me with sad, frightened eyes and said, "If you hear it again, don't respond. Don't acknowledge it. And whatever you do, don't open the crawlspace door." That night I heard it again. The crying started at exactly midnight, according to my phone. But this time, it was louder, more desperate, and between the sobs, I could hear words. "Please," a man's voice whispered from beneath the floor. "Please, it's so dark, I can't see, I can't breathe." Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was impossible, that I was hearing things, that there was a logical explanation. But that voice was so clear, so full of anguish that I couldn't ignore it. "Who are you?" I whispered, my mouth dry with fear. "Trapped," the voice responded immediately, as if it had been waiting for acknowledgement. "Been trapped so long. Can't find the way out. The darkness, it goes on forever. How can I help you?" "The door," the voice said, now directly beneath my bed. "There's a door. You can open it. Please, I need to get out. I need to see the light again." I remembered Grandpa's warning, but the desperation in that voice was overwhelming. How could I ignore someone in such pain? Someone who needed help? "Where's the door?" I asked. "Downstairs, under the kitchen. The crawl space. Please hurry. He's coming." "Who's coming?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, the crying intensified, now mixed with sounds of panic, of something crawling frantically beneath the floor. Then came a new sound. Heavy footsteps, distant but approaching, each impact accompanied by a deep, rumbling groan that vibrated through the floorboards. "Oh God, he's found me," the voice whimpered. "Please, please, open the door." The footsteps grew closer, louder, until they were directly beneath my room. The floor began to shake. My water glass on the nightstand rattled against the wood. And then, abruptly, everything went silent. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat with my back against the wall, lights on, waiting for dawn. The next morning, I told Grandpa everything. He looked older somehow, more tired. "The crawl space," he said. "You need to look in the crawl space, but I'm coming with you." We went down to the kitchen, where a small door in the floor led to the space beneath the house. Grandpa hadn't opened it in years. The hinges screamed as we pulled it up, revealing a dark opening and a set of wooden steps descending into blackness. I went down first, phone flashlight cutting through the gloom. The crawl space was maybe 4 feet high, forcing me to crouch. The dirt floor was damp, and the air smelled of earth and rot. Exposed floor joists created a canopy of shadow above me. And there, scattered across the dirt, were old mining helmets, 5 of them, their carbide lamps long since gone dark. Next to them lay work clothes, boots, and lunch pails, all arranged as if their owners had simply vanished while sitting there. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. On the underside of the floorboards, directly beneath my bedroom, the dust had been disturbed, not just brushed away, but marked with clear impressions, as if someone had been lying there, pressed against the boards from below. The outline was perfectly visible. Shoulders, back, legs, and there were scratches in the wood, deep gouges made by desperate fingers trying to claw through. The dust was fresh. The scratches were fresh. Whatever had been lying there had been there recently. Maybe last night. Maybe while I'd been sleeping just inches above it. Sweet Jesus, Grandpa breathed from the stairs behind me. I pointed my light into the far corners of the crawl space, and that's when I saw it. A hole in the foundation wall, maybe 3 feet across, leading into absolute darkness. The edges were rough, as if something had torn through the concrete and stone. And from that hole came a smell that made me gag. Decay, dampness, and something else, something ancient and wrong. The old tunnels, Grandpa whispered. That's a tunnel entrance. It wasn't there before. I swear to God, it wasn't there before. We scrambled back up the stairs, slamming the crawl space door shut. Grandpa called his neighbor, Carl, who'd also worked in the mines. Carl came over and listened to our story with a grim expression. My daddy used to tell me stories, Carl said, about something that lived in the deepest parts of Stone Ridge No. 7. After the cave-ins, after they sealed the mine, the few survivors who made it out wouldn't talk about what they'd seen down there, but they had nightmares for the rest of their lives. Woke up screaming about something that walked through the darkness, something that collected the miners who got lost. Collected them for what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Carl shook his head. Daddy never said. But he told me that if I ever heard voices from under the house, I should leave town immediately, because it meant the thing in the tunnels was getting close to the surface. That night I packed my bags. Grandpa didn't argue. He packed his own bags too. We were both done with that house, done with Stone Ridge. As we were loading the car, I heard it one last time. That crying voice, but now it was coming from multiple places at once. From the crawl space, from the abandoned house next door, from the empty house across the street. A chorus of desperate voices, all begging to be let out, all warning that he was coming. And beneath those voices, I heard the footsteps again. Heavy, slow, impossibly deep underground, but rising, always rising, toward the surface. We drove away that night and never went back. Grandpa moved in with my parents in Richmond. The house on Blackwell Street sits empty now, along with most of Stone Ridge. The town is dying, the population dwindling year by year as people move away, often suddenly, often in the middle of the night. But sometimes I wonder about those voices. Were they the miners who died in the cave-ins, somehow preserved in the darkness, still calling for help after all these years? Or were they something else, something that uses the voices of the dead to lure the living closer to that hole in the foundation, closer to whatever waits in the endless tunnels beneath the town? I don't know, but I know this. I'll never go back to Stone Ridge. And if you ever find yourself in an old coal town in southwestern Virginia, in one of those company houses built over sealed mines, and you hear crying under your floorboards at night, don't respond. Don't investigate. And whatever you do, don't open the crawl space door, because something down there in the darkness is always listening, always waiting, always hoping that someone will finally let it out. The following text was extracted from a notes app on a smartphone discovered on November 3rd, 2024, on the Old Mill Crossing Bridge in Dawson County, northern Georgia. The phone belonged to Ethan Vickers, age 26, who was reported missing that same evening. Search efforts have been ongoing. What follows is the complete text from his notes, apparently written over several days. October 28th. My name is Ethan Vickers, and I'm documenting this because I need to make sense of what's happening. I moved to Dawsonville, Georgia, 3 months ago for a job with the Forestry Service. The town sits in the Appalachian foothills, beautiful country, quiet and peaceful. Or so I thought. There's an old wooden bridge about 2 miles from my rental house on Grizzle Road. It's called Old Mill Crossing, built sometime in the 1920s to serve a lumber mill that's long gone. The bridge spans a creek called Amicalola Run, maybe 60 feet across, with wooden planks and rope railings that have been reinforced with steel cables over the years. It's still used by hikers and locals as a shortcut between the main road and the hiking trails. I cross that bridge almost every evening on my run. It's part of my regular 5-mile loop. And for the first 2 months, everything was normal. The bridge creaks when you walk on it. Your footsteps echo off the water below. And sometimes you can hear the planks groaning under your weight. But last week, something changed. October 29th. It happened again tonight, so I'm writing this down immediately while it's fresh in my mind. I was crossing the bridge around 7 p.m., just after sunset. The light was fading, that purple-gray twilight that makes everything look slightly unreal. I stepped onto the bridge, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. Complete silence. My running shoes should have been making sound on those wooden planks. That hollow thump, thump, thump I'd heard hundreds of times before. But there was nothing. I could hear my breathing, hear my heartbeat, hear the creek running below, but my footsteps made no sound at all. I stopped in the middle of the bridge, lifted my foot, and brought it down hard on the planks. Nothing. Not even a creak. It was like walking on air, or like the bridge itself was swallowing the sound. Then I felt it. That prickling sensation on the back of your neck when you know someone's watching you. I turned around, but the bridge behind me was empty. Just those old wooden planks stretching back to the trail entrance. Nobody there. I continued across, unsettled but trying to rationalize it. Acoustic dead zones, maybe. Temperature inversions affecting sound waves. Something scientific and explainable. But I know what I felt. And I know I wasn't alone on that bridge. October 30th, I went back tonight. I know it was stupid, but I had to know if it would happen again. I brought my phone, kept it in my hand the whole time, ready to record if anything strange occurred. Same thing. The moment I stepped onto the bridge, all sound from my footsteps ceased. That unnatural silence wrapped around me like a blanket. But tonight was worse because I saw it, the shadow. I was about halfway across when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. On the rope railing to my right, a shadow stretched along the weathered wood. A human-shaped shadow, tall and thin, moving slowly along the railing toward me. I spun around. Nobody behind me, nobody in front of me. Just that shadow, continuing its slow progress along the railing, getting closer with each second. I ran. God help me, I ran, and even running, my feet made no sound on those planks. But I could hear something else. Breathing. Not my own rapid, panicked breaths, but someone else's. Slow, measured breaths, keeping pace with me. I didn't look back. I made it off the bridge and kept running until I reached the main road, where a sound suddenly returned in a rush that was almost painful. Cars, wind in the trees, my own footsteps on asphalt. I'm not going back to that bridge. I don't care if it adds 3 miles to my running route. Whatever is on Old Mill Crossing can stay there. October 31st, I talked to Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor. about the bridge today. She's lived in Dawsonville her whole life, must be in her 80s. When I mentioned Old Mill Crossing, her face went pale. "You've been crossing that bridge at night?" she asked. I told her yes, but not anymore. She shook her head slowly. "Smart boy. There's a reason locals don't use that bridge after dark. Never have, not since I was a girl." She told me a story. Back in 1947, a man named Thomas Garrett worked at the lumber mill. He lived on one side of the creek, the mill was on the other, and he crossed that bridge twice a day, every day, for 15 years, until one November night, when he didn't come home. They found his lunch pail on the bridge the next morning, found his hat, found his coat, neatly folded in the exact center of the span. But they never found Thomas Garrett. "Folks say he's still there," Mrs. Henderson said, "still crossing that bridge over and over, looking for the way home. And if you cross at night, he follows you, tries to find a way back through you somehow. The silence is his silence. The shadow is his shadow. And if he catches up to you..." She didn't finish that sentence, didn't need to. November 1st, I should have listened. I should have stayed away. But curiosity has always been my weakness, and I needed to know the truth. I needed proof. Tonight, I went back to Old Mill Crossing one last time. I brought my phone, set it to record video before I even stepped onto the bridge. I wanted documentation, wanted evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. The silence hit me immediately, that dead air sensation that makes your ears ache. I started walking, phone held out in front of me, recording the empty bridge ahead. That's when I felt it. Breath on my neck. Not wind. Breath. Warm and damp and impossibly close. Like someone was standing directly behind me, their mouth inches from my skin. I froze. The breathing continued, slow and deliberate. In, out, in, out. I could feel it stirring the hair on my neck. I slowly raised my phone and switched to the front-facing camera, trying to see what was behind me. But when I looked at the screen, I saw only myself, alone on the bridge. Yet the breathing continued, and now it was getting heavier, more labored, as if whatever was behind me was exerting tremendous effort. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't respond. I was frozen in place, that breath on my neck growing hotter, more urgent. Then I heard it, a whisper, so quiet I almost missed it beneath the sound of breathing. "Finally," it said, "someone who can hear me." The shadow appeared on the railing beside me, but now I could see more detail. It wasn't just a shadow. It had substance, dimension, and it was reaching toward me. "I've been trying so long," the voice whispered, now coming from all around me. "So many years, so many people crossed this bridge, but they couldn't hear me, couldn't see me. But you can. You're the first one who stayed long enough." The shadow's hand touched my arm, and it was cold, so cold it burned. I tried to pull away, but I still couldn't move. I was trapped, held in place by something I couldn't see, couldn't fight. "Don't be afraid," the voice said. "It only hurts for a moment. And then you'll understand. You'll understand what it's like to be stuck between, to be neither here nor there, to walk the same path forever, waiting for someone to set you free." The cold spread up my arm, into my shoulder, creeping toward my chest. My phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattered silently on the wooden planks. The screen was still lit, still recording. "They say I disappeared," the voice continued, "but I didn't disappear. I'm still here. I'm always here, And now finally, someone will remember me. Someone will carry my story forward. The cold reached my heart, and I gasped, finally able to move again. But it was too late. Something was pulling me, dragging me toward the railing, toward the edge of the bridge. I grabbed for the rope, but my hand passed through it like smoke. I could see the creek below, black water reflecting the moonlight. And I could see something else, too. A figure standing in the water, tall and thin, with no face, just a blank expanse where features should be. It was looking up at me, waiting. "It's time," the whisper said. "Time to take my place. I've been crossing this bridge for 77 years, walking back and forth, unable to leave. But you can set me free. You can take my place, and I can finally rest." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The bridge had stolen my voice, just like it had stolen my footsteps. I was leaning over the railing now, the figure in the water, reaching up toward me, and I knew that if it touched me, I would fall, would disappear, just like Thomas Garrett had disappeared, would become the next ghost walking this cursed bridge forever. The last thing I remember clearly is the cold spreading through my entire body, and the whisper in my ear saying, "Thank you." The text ends here. The phone was found in the exact center of the Old Mill Crossing Bridge at 7:43 a.m. on November 4th by a morning jogger. The video file mentioned in the notes was corrupted and unrecoverable except for the final 3 seconds of audio, which consists of a single heavy exhalation. Ethan Vickers has not been seen since the evening of November 3rd. A search of the creek and surrounding area revealed no body. His jacket was found neatly folded on the bridge, in the same location where Thomas Garrett's coat was discovered in 1947. The phone screen protector shows 3 long scratches, as if made by fingernails dragging across the glass. Local authorities have classified this as an open missing person case. The Old Mill Crossing Bridge has been closed to public access, pending investigation. My name is Grant Holloway, and I've been hunting the hills of Pine Hollow, Kentucky for 23 years. I know every hollow, every ridge, every deer trail in this karst country, like I know the lines on my own hands. Or at least, I thought I did. What happened to me on November 12th has shaken that certainty to its core, and I'm writing this account now while the details are still fresh, while I can still feel the phantom ache in my ankles and taste the mineral tang of clay dust in my mouth. I left my cabin on Sinkhole Ridge Road at dawn, rifle slung over my shoulder, heading for the eastern slopes, where I'd spotted a decent 8-point buck the week before. The morning was cold and clear, temperature hovering around 38 degrees, frost still clinging to the shadows. My watch read 5:47 a.m. when I started up the trail. Pine Hollow is classic Kentucky karst country, riddled with limestone caves and sinkholes. The ground beneath your feet honeycombed with passages that drop hundreds of feet into darkness. The hollow itself is named for the stand of old-growth pines that somehow survived the logging era, their roots finding purchase in the thin soil above the limestone bedrock. Local cavers love this area, always discovering new passages, new chambers in the labyrinth below. I've always been careful around the sinkholes. Lost a dog to one when I was 12, watched him disappear into a crack in the earth, no wider than my arm. We never found him, Never even heard him hit bottom. The hunt started normally enough. I followed the ridgeline east, moving slowly, watching for sign. Around what should have been 7 a.m., I spotted fresh scrapes on a tree trunk and decided to set up and wait. I found a good spot with a clear view of the game trail, settled in behind a fallen log, and waited for the sun to climb higher. That's the last thing I remember clearly. The next thing I knew, I was standing in my driveway, my truck parked behind me, keys in my hand. The sun was low on the horizon, painting the sky orange and purple with the approach of dusk. I felt disoriented, dizzy, like I'd just woken from a deep sleep. I looked at my watch. 8:52 p.m. That couldn't be right. I'd been in the woods since dawn, but I had no memory of the day passing, no memory of hunting, of walking back to my truck, of the drive home. Nothing. Just a blank space where nearly 15 hours should have been. I checked my phone. Dead. Completely dead, which was strange because I'd charged it fully the night before. When I got inside and plugged it in, waiting for it to boot up, I noticed something else. The digital clock on my microwave was flashing. The battery-powered clock on my wall had stopped. And when my phone finally powered on, it showed a screen I'd never seen before. Critical battery failure. Last known time, 5:47 a.m. Every device I owned had stopped at exactly 5:47 a.m. I sat down at my kitchen table, trying to make sense of it. Had I blacked out? Had some kind of medical event? But I felt fine, physically. No headache, no confusion beyond the obvious gap in my memory. Just tired, bone-deep tired, like I'd been walking for hours. That's when I noticed my boots. They were covered in red clay, not the brown soil common to the surface in Pine Hollow, but the distinctive rust-red clay that you only find deep underground, in the karst caves and passages that honeycomb the limestone. That clay has a unique color and consistency, and every caver in Kentucky knows it on sight. But I hadn't been caving. I'd been hunting on the surface trails. Hadn't I? I pulled off my boots with shaking hands and examined them more closely. The clay was caked thick on the soles, worked into every tread, and when I touched it, it was still slightly damp, fresh, as if I'd been walking through it recently. I stripped off my jacket and hunting pants, and that's when I saw them. The scratches. Both my ankles were marked with thin, parallel scratches, 4 on the left ankle, 5 on the right. They weren't deep enough to bleed much, just superficial marks in the skin, but they were deliberate, purposeful. They looked like claw marks, or like someone with very thin, very strong fingers had grabbed my ankles and held on tight. My heart started to race. I turned my ankles, examining the marks. Under the kitchen light, they wrapped around from the front to the back, as if whatever made them had been pulling me, dragging me. But toward what? And from where? I spent the next hour searching my truck, looking for any clue about where I'd been. In the bed of the truck, I found more red clay and something else that made my blood run cold. A broken stalactite fragment, the kind that takes thousands of years to form in underground chambers. I'd been in a cave. Somehow, during those missing hours, I'd gone deep enough underground to encounter formations. But I had no memory of it. No memory of descending, of crawling through passages, of the cold and the dark that should have accompanied such a journey. The next morning, still rattled and exhausted, despite sleeping 12 hours straight, I drove back to where I'd parked my truck the previous day. The spot was exactly where I expected it to be, on the logging road that serves as the main access to the eastern slopes. But when I followed my own tracks from the day before, they led only 50 yards into the woods before stopping abruptly at the edge of a sinkhole I'd never seen before. It wasn't on any of my maps, wasn't marked on the trail. It was maybe 8 feet across, perfectly circular, the edges lined with those old pines. And when I shone my flashlight into it, I could see that it dropped straight down for at least 30 feet before opening into what looked like a larger chamber below. Red clay lined the walls. I stood there for a long time, staring into that hole, trying to remember. Had I fallen in? Had I climbed down? The walls looked too smooth to climb without gear, but somehow I must have descended, because that's the only explanation for the clay on my boots, for the stalactite fragment in my truck. Then I saw them, boot prints in the clay, just inside the entrance to the sinkhole, pressed into a narrow ledge about 6 feet down. My boot prints, I realized with growing dread. The tread pattern matched perfectly, but there were other marks too. Handprints, if you could call them that. They were too long, too thin. The fingers stretched impossibly far apart. They were pressed into the clay all around my boot prints, dozens of them, overlapping, as if multiple hands had been reaching, grasping, pulling. I backed away from the sinkhole, my breath coming in short gasps. Something had been down there with me. Something that had left those marks on my ankles, that had somehow pulled me into that hole and brought me back out again 3 hours later, though my watch insisted it had been mere minutes. Time works differently underground, the old cavers say. In the absolute darkness, in the maze of passages where direction loses meaning, minutes can feel like hours, or hours can pass in what feels like moments. But this was different. This wasn't perception. Every clock I owned had stopped at 5:47, as if time itself had frozen for those 3 hours, or as if I'd been removed from time entirely. I reported the sinkhole to the county authorities, marked it on my maps, warned other hunters to stay clear. But I didn't tell them about the handprints, about the scratches on my ankles, about the 3 missing hours. Who would believe me? I haven't gone back to Pine Hollow since then. I've taken up fishing instead, started hunting the managed lands farther north, where the ground is solid and predictable. Some nights, I still wake up with the taste of clay dust in my mouth and the phantom sensation of thin, cold fingers wrapped around my ankles, pulling me down into darkness. The scratches healed within a week, fading to thin white lines that are barely visible now, but I know they're there. I check them every morning, running my fingers over the marks, reminding myself that it really happened, that I really lost 3 hours somewhere beneath Pine Hollow. The thing that terrifies me most, the thought that wakes me in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, is this. What if I didn't lose 3 hours? What if I was down there much longer, days or weeks or months, and only 3 hours passed up here on the surface? What if those hands were pulling me deeper, and something else, some final shred of my humanity or my will to survive, pulled me back up? Because when I closed my eyes, when I let my mind drift toward that blank space in my memory, I sometimes catch glimpses of things I shouldn't be able to remember. Passages stretching away into darkness, the sound of water dripping in vast underground chambers, and voices, dozens of voices whispering in a language I've never heard, but somehow almost understand, asking me to stay, to join them, to give up the light and embrace the eternal darkness of the deep places beneath the earth. I still have that stalactite fragment. I keep it in a drawer in my desk, and sometimes I take it out and hold it, feeling its weight, examining the perfect curve of its form. It takes thousands of years for such a formation to grow, drop by patient drop in the darkness. And yet, I broke it off in a moment I can't remember, in a place I never consciously went. The clay finally washed out of my boots after the fourth or fifth washing. But I can never quite get rid of the smell. That mineral scent of deep earth, of places where sunlight has never reached and never will. It lingers in the leather, a permanent reminder. I'm sharing this account because I need people to know. If you hunt in Pine Hollow, if you hike those trails or explore those caves, be careful, be aware. And if you ever find yourself standing somewhere with no memory of how you got there, if your watch has stopped and you feel thin scratches around your ankles, run. Get away from that place as fast as you can and never, ever go back. Because something lives in those karst passages beneath Kentucky. Something that exists outside of time. Something that reaches up through the sinkholes and cracks in the limestone to pull the unwary down into its domain. And I was lucky. I came back, but I don't think everyone does. My name is Michael Garrett, and I'm a sales representative for a medical equipment company based out of Atlanta. My job requires me to drive all over northern Georgia, visiting hospitals and clinics, spending more time on the road than I do at home. I've driven through every kind of weather, every time of day and night, and I've seen plenty of strange things on these mountain roads. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I encountered on Route 60 near the Chattahoochee National Forest on the morning of October 23rd. I'd left my hotel in Dahlonega at 5:30 a.m., trying to beat the morning traffic into Blue Ridge for an early meeting. The fog that morning was thick, the kind of dense mountain fog that turns your headlights into useless beams of diffused light. I was driving slowly, maybe 30 miles per hour, my eyes straining to see the yellow line that marked the edge of the road. Route 60 winds through some of the most remote parts of the Chattahoochee National Forest, miles of nothing but dense woods on either side. At that hour in that fog, I hadn't seen another car in 20 minutes. The radio had gone to static, leaving only the sound of my tires on wet asphalt and the rhythmic swish of my windshield wipers. I was about 15 miles outside of Souches when I saw her. She walked out of the fog directly ahead of me, right in the center of the road. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, wearing a white dress that seemed to glow in the mist. Her hair was long and dark, hanging wet and limp around her shoulders. And she was walking toward me, right down the middle of the highway, with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who had all the time in the world. I slammed on my brakes, my truck fishtailing slightly on the damp road before coming to a stop maybe 20 feet from her. My heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding my system. What was a child doing out here, alone, in the middle of nowhere, at dawn? I sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at her through the windshield. She had stopped walking when I braked, And now she just stood there, perfectly still, looking at me. Or at least, I thought she was looking at me. It was hard to tell in the fog and the dim light. But what I remember most clearly, what still haunts me, is that she didn't blink, not once. She just stared with wide, unmoving eyes. I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened my door, the interior light seeming harsh and intrusive in the pre-dawn darkness. "Hey," I called out. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" She didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there in that white dress, water dripping from her hair, creating small puddles at her bare feet. I stepped out of the truck, leaving the door open, the engine running. The fog was even thicker at ground level, swirling around my legs like something alive. "Sweetheart, where are your parents?" I said, taking a few steps toward her. "It's not safe out here. Let me help you." Still no response. But as I moved closer, I noticed something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet in any direction, but I could see her perfectly clearly. She was surrounded by fog, emerged from fog, but the fog didn't seem to touch her. It parted around her like water around a stone. I was maybe 10 feet away when she spoke. "He's still looking for us," she said, her voice flat, emotionless, like a recording. "He's been looking for so long." "Who?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. "Who's looking for you?" She tilted her head slightly, still not blinking, and said, "We couldn't run fast enough. The fog was too thick. He knew these roads better than we did." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold morning air. "Honey, I don't understand. Where are your parents? Let me call someone, get you some help." She smiled then, and it was the most disturbing thing I have ever seen. Not because it was evil or malicious, but because it was sad, infinitely sad, the smile of someone who knows something terrible that you don't. "They're still in the car," she said, "down there in the ravine. We've been there for a long time, but I can walk now. I can walk on the road again. I can warn people." I reached for my phone, some instinct telling me I needed to document this, needed proof of what I was seeing. But when I looked down to pull it from my pocket, when I looked up again, she was gone. Just gone. Vanished into the fog as completely as if she'd never been there at all. I stood there alone on Route 60, my truck idling behind me, fog swirling around my legs, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my truck's engine and the pounding of my heart. "Hello?" I called out, my voice seeming small and swallowed by the mist. "Where did you go?" No answer. Nothing but fog and silence. I walked to where she'd been standing, my shoes splashing through puddles on the wet asphalt. And that's when I saw them. Footprints. Small, bare footprints. The kind a child would make, pressed into the thin layer of water on the road. I knelt down, reached out, and touched one of the prints. The water was warm. Not hot, but warm. As if she'd been standing in sunshine. But the morning was cold. The fog was cold. Everything was cold except these footprints. I followed them with my eyes. They led from the center of the road to the edge, to the guardrail, and then nothing. The guardrail was old, rusted, with gaps where sections had been replaced over the years. Beyond it was darkness and fog, and the sound of water running far below. I ran back to my truck, grabbed my flashlight, and returned to the guardrail. I shone the light down into the ravine, but the fog was too thick. I could see maybe 15 feet before the beam disappeared into white nothingness. My hands were shaking as I called 911. The dispatcher seemed skeptical at first, probably thought I was drunk or crazy, but I insisted. A little girl on the road, footprints leading to the ravine. Something was very wrong. The sheriff's deputy arrived 30 minutes later, his cruiser's lights cutting through the fog in red and blue pulses. His name was Deputy Harris, a heavy-set man in his 50s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I told him everything, expecting him to laugh, to tell me I'd seen a deer or a trick of the fog. But he didn't. As I described the girl in the white dress, the way she'd spoken, the footprints, his face went pale. "Jesus," he muttered, rubbing his face with one hand. "Not again." "What do you mean, not again?" I asked. He sighed, looking out at the fog-shrouded road. "How long have you been driving this route?" "About a year. Why? You ever hear about the Morrison family?" I shook my head. Deputy Harris leaned against his cruiser, his expression grim. 20 years ago, this week, a family from Florida was driving through here on vacation. The Morrisons. Mother, father, and their 8-year-old daughter, Emma. They were heading to a cabin rental up in Blue Ridge. He paused, as if gathering himself to continue. Heavy fog that night, just like this morning. Another driver reported seeing their car go off the road right about where we're standing. When we got here, we found tire marks, found where they'd crashed through the guardrail. Took us 2 days to find the car. It had gone down maybe 80 feet into the ravine, hit a tree. Parents were dead on impact. "And the daughter?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Never found her." The car doors were open. We searched for weeks, brought in dogs, volunteers, experts from Atlanta. Nothing. It was like she'd just vanished. Some folks thought maybe she'd been thrown clear, wandered off in shock, died somewhere in the woods. But we never found a body. Never found any trace of her at all. I felt cold spreading through my chest. "Emma Morrison," I said. "That was her name?" "Yeah, 8 years old, wearing a white nightgown when they crashed. Her mother had let her sleep in the car." We stood there in silence for a long moment, both of us staring at those warm, wet footprints on the road. "She's been seen before," Deputy Harris finally said. "Not often, maybe 4 or 5 times over the years, always around the anniversary of the crash, always in heavy fog, always right here on this stretch of road. Drivers report seeing a little girl in white, and then she disappears. Most people think they imagined it, don't report it, but some do. Has anyone—" I trailed off, not sure how to phrase the question. "Has anyone looked recently? For the car? For remains?" "Every year," he said quietly. "Every year, on the anniversary, I go down there myself. The car is still there, what's left of it. Rusted, overgrown. But we've never found Emma Morrison. And I don't think we ever will." He took photos of the footprints, though I could tell he didn't expect them to prove anything. He'd seen this before, dealt with this before. This was just another chapter in a story that had no ending. Before he left, Deputy Harris gave me his card and told me to call if I remembered any other details. Then he said something that has stayed with me ever since. "She's trying to warn people," he said. "That's what we think. The fog, these roads, they're dangerous. Maybe she's still out here trying to save others from what happened to her family. Or maybe," he trailed off, shaking his head, "maybe some things just don't make sense. and we're not meant to understand them. I didn't make my meeting in Blue Ridge that morning. I sat in a diner in Suches until the fog burned off, drinking coffee and trying to process what I'd seen. By noon, the sun was out, the sky was clear, and Route 60 looked like any other mountain highway. Beautiful and peaceful. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard, and I know those footprints were real, were warm, were made by something that shouldn't exist, but does. I still drive Route 60. My job requires it. But I never drive it in the fog anymore, especially not in October. I take the long way around, even if it adds an hour to my trip, because I know Emma Morrison is still out there, still walking that road, still looking for someone who can hear her warning. And I've heard enough. My name is Jacob Reese, and I'm 41 years old now. What happened to me and my best friend Danny Pierce in the abandoned Pardee mine tunnels of Wise County, Virginia, happened 25 years ago. But I still can't drive past those mountains without feeling my chest tighten with a fear I've never been able to shake. It was October 1999. Danny and I were 16, stupid and fearless in the way only teenage boys can be. We'd heard about the old ventilation shaft from Danny's older brother, who swore it was still accessible, despite the main mine entrance being sealed decades earlier. The Pardee mine had closed in 1972 after a series of cave-ins killed 9 men, and the whole operation was abandoned, left to rot in the Virginia hills. We went on a Saturday afternoon, our backpacks loaded with flashlights, rope, and the kind of bravado that comes from never having faced real danger. The ventilation shaft was exactly where we'd been told, hidden behind a collapsed equipment shed off Old Pardee Road. The entrance was maybe 3 feet across, protected by a rusted iron grate that pulled away with minimal effort. "You sure about this?" I asked, staring into the darkness. Danny grinned. "Come on, man. When are we ever going to get another chance like this?" We squeezed through the opening and started our descent. The shaft angled downward steeply, forcing us to half crawl, half slide on our stomachs. Our flashlight beams cut weak paths through the absolute blackness, illuminating ancient wooden support timbers and walls, black with decades of coal dust. The air was cold and damp, tasting of minerals and decay. After maybe 70 feet, the ventilation shaft opened into a larger passage, tall enough for us to stand upright. This was clearly one of the main tunnels, probably dating back to the 20s or 30s when Pardee was in full operation. Old rail tracks ran along the floor, half buried in sediment and debris. "This is incredible," Danny whispered, his voice echoing strangely off the walls. "Let's go deeper." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back, to get out while we still could. But I followed him anyway, our footsteps echoing in the hollow darkness as we walked deeper into the mountain. That's when we heard it, singing. A woman's voice, clear and beautiful and utterly impossible, echoing through the tunnels from somewhere ahead of us. The song was one I recognized immediately, an old Appalachian ballad my grandmother had sung to me as a child. Pretty sorrow, down in some lone valley, in a lonesome place, where the wild birds do whistle, and their notes do increase. "Is someone else down here?" Danny asked, but his voice was shaking, because we both knew something was fundamentally wrong with what we were hearing. The voice had a quality that made no logical sense. It sounded like it was coming from far away, maybe a quarter-mile deep in the mine. But simultaneously, it sounded like the singer was standing right next to us, whispering directly into our ears. The acoustics were impossible, defying every law of physics I understood. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness behind us. Nothing. Just the empty tunnel stretching back toward the entrance. "Hello?" Danny called out, and his voice cracked with fear. "Is anyone there?" The singing stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse than the sound, heavy and expectant, like the mountain itself was holding its breath and listening. Then the voice spoke, no longer singing, but speaking in that same clear, beautiful, impossible tone. "Why did you wake me, boys? Why did you come to this place?" "We need to leave," I said, grabbing Danny's arm. "Right now." We turned and started back toward the entrance, walking quickly but not quite running. That's when the singing started again, but now it was different. Now the voice was behind us, following us, and the words had changed. "Bar farewell, my dear sorrow. I bid you adieu, and I'll dream of pretty sorrow wherever I go." Those weren't the right lyrics. I knew that song, had heard it 100 times, and those weren't the words. But the voice kept singing, kept getting closer, and beneath it I could hear something else, a deep, rhythmic rumbling like the sound of impossibly large lungs drawing breath in the darkness behind us. "Run!" I screamed. We ran. Our flashlight beams bounced wildly, showing brief glimpses of tunnel walls, support timbers, and endless darkness. Behind us, the singing grew louder, and beneath it came a new sound that made my blood turn to ice. A grinding, crashing sound like tons of rock and earth moving, like the tunnel itself was collapsing. I looked back once, just once, and what I saw has haunted my dreams for 25 years. The tunnel was closing, not collapsing in the traditional sense, but closing, the walls drawing together like a throat swallowing. And in the darkness, beyond our lights, something massive was there, something that filled the entire shaft from floor to ceiling, something that moved with that terrible grinding sound. We ran harder than I've ever run in my life. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but terror kept me moving. The entrance should have been close, should have been visible, but the tunnel seemed to stretch, to grow longer, with each desperate step. Then Danny fell. He went down hard, his flashlight skittering across the floor and going out. I grabbed his arm and hauled him up, and that's when I saw it on the wall beside us. Names, dozens of names, scratched into the coal-black walls, along with dates. Sarah Mullins, 1927. Thomas Bradley, 1943. Jennifer Morrison, 1968. The list went on, maybe 20 names in total, spanning nearly 80 years, and I understood with terrible clarity that we were looking at a memorial or a warning or something far worse. "Move!" I screamed, pulling Danny forward. The grinding sound was so close now, I could feel vibrations through the floor. The air pressure was changing, being pushed ahead of whatever was pursuing us. My flashlight flickered, once, twice, and I thought we were done. Thought we'd become 2 more names on that wall. Then I saw it. Daylight. Just a faint gray glow ahead, but it was there, real and beautiful, and salvation. We sprinted the last 30 feet and threw ourselves through that ventilation shaft opening, tumbling out into the October afternoon, gasping and sobbing and alive. Behind us, from deep in the tunnel, the singing continued for a moment longer. Then it stopped, with a sound like a sigh, like disappointment, like a promise that it would wait. We ran down that mountain without looking back, ran until we couldn't run anymore, then walked in silence back to town. We never spoke about it to anyone except each other. What would we say? Who would believe us? But 3 days later, the State Geological Survey announced that the entire eastern section of the Pardee mine had experienced a catastrophic collapse. They sealed every entrance they could find, poured concrete, erected warning signs, and chain link fences. The official explanation was unstable ground, decades of water damage weakening the support structures. I know better. I know what's down there in those tunnels, what's been waiting in the darkness since at least 1927, maybe longer. I know it takes people, adds their names to its wall, adds their voices to its song. Danny moved to California after high school, and we lost touch for years. But last October, on the 25th anniversary of that day, he called me out of the blue. We didn't talk about much, just checked in, confirmed we were both still here, still alive, still above ground. Before he hung up, he said something I'll never forget. I still hear it sometimes, Jake. Late at night when everything's quiet, that voice singing. Do you? I do. God help me, I do. I still live in southwestern Virginia. Still drive past the sealed Pardee mine entrances sometimes. The concrete barriers are solid, the warnings clear. But I know they're not enough. Because whatever is down there doesn't need an open entrance. It has time, endless time. And eventually someone will find a way in. Someone always does. I'm telling this story now because people need to understand, if you're ever in Wise County, if you ever see those sealed mine entrances, don't be curious. Don't wonder what's inside. And if you ever hear singing coming from beneath the ground, beautiful and terrible and wrong, run. Run and don't look back, because the mountain keeps what it takes. And it almost took us that October day 25 years ago. Some places should stay buried. Some songs should never be heard. And some darkness should never, ever be disturbed. My name is Cameron Doyle, and I'm a nature videographer based out of Asheville, North Carolina. I've spent the last 5 years documenting the wildlife and landscapes of the Black Mountains, building a decent following on YouTube with my drone footage of these ancient peaks. I've filmed everything from black bears to elk migrations, from thunderstorms rolling through valleys to the brilliant fall colors that make this region famous. But nothing I've ever captured on camera compares to what I recorded on October 15th, 2024, on Cattail Ridge in the Black Mountains of western North Carolina. And nothing has made me question my understanding of reality quite like what I found when I went to investigate. I'd heard about the shadow from locals in the small town of Burnsville. I was having coffee at the Mountain Grounds Cafe on Pension Street when an old-timer named Earl Hutchins overheard me talking about my next filming location. He leaned over from the adjacent table, his weathered face serious. "You planning to film up on Cattail Ridge?" he asked. I told him I was, that I wanted to catch the sunset from that elevation. Earl shook his head slowly. "You might see something up there you ain't expecting. Folks around here know about the shadow. Been crossing that ridge at sundown for as long as anyone can remember. Some say it's been doing it for 100 years or more. I smiled politely, thinking this was another local legend, the kind of folklore that makes for good campfire stories. But Earl wasn't smiling. "I'm serious, son. Every few weeks, right around sunset, something crosses that ridge. Something tall. Too tall to be a man. Moves wrong to be a bear. You see it from down in the valley sometimes, silhouetted against the sky. Just this dark shape, moving along the ridgeline, taking these long, long strides." He paused, stirring his coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "My grandfather saw it back in the 30s. My father saw it in the 60s. I saw it myself in 1987, and I'll never forget it. That thing, whatever it is, it doesn't belong in this world." I thanked him for the information, paid for my coffee, and drove up to Cattail Ridge anyway, because that's what I do. I investigate, I document, I capture the unexplained, and try to find rational explanations. And if there really was something unusual crossing that ridge, I wanted footage of it. Cattail Ridge sits at about 5,800 feet elevation, a long, narrow ridgeline that runs north-south for maybe 2 miles. The terrain is mostly open, covered in mountain grasses and low shrubs, with stunning views of the surrounding peaks. It's accessible by a rough Forest Service road that dead ends at a small parking area. I arrived around 5:30 p.m., giving myself plenty of time to set up. The sunset was predicted for 6:47 p.m., and according to Earl, the shadow always appeared within 15 minutes of sunset. I set up my drone, a professional-grade DJI with a 4K camera, and positioned myself at the southern end of the ridge with a clear view north. The evening was perfect, clear skies, minimal wind, and the autumn light painting everything in shades of gold and amber. I launched the drone at 6:40 p.m., sending it up about 300 feet to get an overhead view of the entire ridgeline. At 6:52 p.m., 5 minutes after sunset, I saw it. At first, I thought it was a hiker, just someone walking along the ridge enjoying the evening. But as I zoomed in with the drone camera, as I watched the figure move against the dimming sky, I realized that Earl had been telling the truth. The figure was massive, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was completely black, silhouetted perfectly against the orange sky, and it was moving along the ridgeline with a strange, loping gait. Each stride covered an impossible distance, maybe 12 or 15 feet, like watching someone walking in slow motion, but covering ground at normal speed. The proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, hanging past where the knees should be. The legs seemed to bend in places they shouldn't. But the movement was unmistakably bipedal, unmistakably purposeful, like something that knew exactly where it was going. I recorded for 3 minutes and 47 seconds. The figure crossed the entire 2-mile ridge in that time, moving at what must have been 15 or 20 miles per hour. Those enormous strides eating up distance with mechanical precision. Then it descended the northern slope and disappeared into the darkening forest. My hands were shaking as I brought the drone back and packed up my equipment. I watched the footage 3 times on my camera screen, and each viewing made my skin crawl more than the last. Whatever I'd captured, it wasn't human. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I could identify. I should have left then, should have driven back to Asheville and spent the next week analyzing the footage, maybe reached out to wildlife experts or anthropologists. But I needed to see the ridge itself, needed to see if there was any physical evidence of what had just crossed it. I grabbed my flashlight and hiking poles and made my way along the ridgeline, following the path the figure had taken. The grass was tall, mostly brown this late in the season, and it rustled around my legs as I walked. That's when I found it. The grass wasn't just disturbed. It was flattened, crushed into the ground in a perfectly straight line that ran along the ridge for as far as my flashlight could illuminate. The line was maybe 18 inches wide, and the grass within it was pressed so flat it looked like something enormously heavy had rolled over it. But there were no roller marks, no vehicle tracks, just this straight, compressed path through the vegetation. I knelt down and examined it more closely. The grass wasn't broken or torn. It was compressed, pushed straight down into the earth with tremendous force. I could see individual blades pressed into the soil, see where the roots had been driven deeper by the weight of whatever had passed over them. And there were impressions, not quite footprints, but depressions in the earth, spaced at impossible intervals. I measured the distance between them with my hiking poles. 14 feet between each depression. I followed the line for maybe a quarter mile, my flashlight beam shaking as my fear grew with each step. The path never deviated, never curved, just ran in an absolutely straight line along the ridge crest. Whatever had made this had walked with inhuman precision, placing each massive stride in perfect alignment. That's when I heard it. A sound in the darkness ahead of me, from the direction the figure had gone. A deep, resonant sound, like air moving through a massive pipe, or like breathing, if something the size of a building could breathe. I ran. I don't care how it sounds. I don't care what it makes me. I ran back down that ridge to my truck, and I drove away from Cattail Ridge faster than was safe on those winding mountain roads. I've analyzed the footage 100 times since that night. I've shown it to wildlife experts who have no explanation. I've posted it online where it's been viewed over 2 million times and generated every theory from man on stilts to interdimensional being. But I've been back to Cattail Ridge in daylight, and I've seen those compressed grass lines myself, and I know what I saw cannot be explained by conventional science. The figure still crosses that ridge. I've talked to others who've seen it, who've described exactly what I captured on drone footage. A massive, dark shape moving with those impossibly long strides, appearing at sunset and disappearing into the forest on the northern slope. I don't film in the Black Mountains anymore. I've relocated my work to the Smokies, to the Blue Ridge, anywhere but those peaks around Cattail Ridge. Because I know now that some things in these ancient mountains are older than our understanding, stranger than our ability to explain. And I know that whatever crosses Cattail Ridge at sundown has been doing it for far longer than Earl's grandfather could remember, and will continue doing it long after all of us are gone. Walking its eternal path along that ridgeline, taking those impossible strides, pursuing some purpose we cannot comprehend. The footage is still online if you want to see it. Search for a Cattail Ridge shadow, but don't go looking for it yourself. Don't stand on that ridge at sunset and wait for it to appear. Because seeing it in person, feeling the weight of its presence, knowing that something that large and that wrong is real and walking through our world, changes you in ways you can't undo. I still have nightmares. about that sound I heard in the darkness, that breathing. And sometimes I wake up convinced I can hear it outside my window, that deep rhythmic sound of something massive drawing breath in the night.